My name is Majid Hussein, and I'm also a senior in high school.
Thank you for coming. We're going to start off the program with the recitation of the Quran by Rashid.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا فتحنا لك فتحا مبينا ليغفر لك الله ما تقدم من ذنبك وما تأخر ويتم نعمته عليك ويهديك صراطا مستقيما وينصرك الله نصرا عزيزا. هو الذي أنزل السكينة في قلوبهم مؤمنين ليزدادوا إيمانا مع إيمانهم ولله جنود السماوات والأرض وكان الله عليما حكيما. ليدخل المؤمنين والمؤمنات جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها ويكفر عنهم سيئاتهم وكان ذلك عند الله فوزا عظيما. ويعذب المنافقين والمنافقات والمشركين والمشركات الظانين بالله ظن السوء عليهم دائرة السوء وغضب الله عليهم ولعنهم وأعد لهم جهنم وساءت مصيرا. ولله جنود السماوات والأرض وكان الله عزيزا حكيما. إنا أرسلناك شاهدا ومبشرا ونذيرا لتؤمنوا بالله ورسوله وتعزروه وتوقروه وتسبحوه بكرة وأصيلا. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you for that beautiful recitation of Quran. Next, I would like to invite Brother Hussein to recite something.
صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Inshallah, I'll do just a little bit more Quran. So I'll begin with another loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألف لام ميم. ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون والذين يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك وبالآخرة هم يوقنون أولئك على هدى من ربهم وأولئك هم المفلحون إن الذين كفروا سواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون
ختم الله على قلوبهم وعلى سمعهم وعلى أبصارهم غشاوة ولهم عذاب عظيم. ومن الناس من يقول آمنا بالله وباليوم الآخر وما هم بمؤمنين يخادعون الله والذين آمنوا وما يخدعون إلا أنفسهم وما يشعرون. في قلوبهم مرض فزادهم الله مرضا ولهم عذاب أليم بما كانوا يكذبون. وإذا قيل لهم لا تفسدوا في الأرض قالوا إنما نحن مصلحون ألا إنهم هم المفسدون ولكن لا يشعرون. وإذا قيل لهم آمنوا كما آمن الناس قالوا أنؤمن كما آمن السفهاء ألا إنهم هم السفهاء ولكن لا يعلمون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على
Thank you for that recitation, Brother Hussein. Welcome everybody and thank you for taking part in the first of many discussion series with Maulana Sulayman Hassan. For those of you who do not know, Maulana Sulayman Hassan is one of the leading Shia scholars in North America. He pursued his Hawza education at home and mashallah reached the highest level of scholarship, which is the completion of the Dars Kharj. Until recently, he was the lead scholar at the newly founded Hawza, Baitul Ilm in Chicago. If this was not enough, he also has a PhD in Near Eastern Studies from the University of Chicago.
We are extremely fortunate to have him here in the DMV area, and we are looking forward to supporting him in his efforts to establish a mosque for the Shia community of Northern Virginia. Living in the U.S., there are many questions that arise in our minds, and it is not every day that we actually have a learned scholar in front of us willing to answer those questions. So I encourage all of you to ask any question that comes to mind. No question is foolish, no question is off limits. Now let's get started with our first session centered around the topic, why should we believe in God, and what does it mean to believe in God?
I request Maulana Sulayman Hassan to give some opening remarks before we open the floor for questions. So on.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين، شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين، سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الأطيبين الأطهرين الهداة المهديين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. And welcome to our discussion on the question of why we should believe in God and what does it mean for our life. This will be an opening discussion, of course. If we were to have a series of sessions every single day, than even if we spent the rest of our lives thinking about, talking about, and then trying to act on the results of this discussion, then that would still not be sufficient to do it justice. But this is the most important question that we as human beings face. What is the purpose and what is the meaning of our life? Why should we live our life in accordance with the teachings of religion? And why shouldn't we assume that what we can perceive with our senses is all that exists within the material world? Why should we not follow a materialist philosophy, and why should we believe in a world beyond the material world? It might not always seem like an important question. And it's very common to have people say, what is the difference between a religious person's life and a non-religious person's life? In many cases, people who believe in God and people who don't believe in God live their lives in overlapping ways or in similar ways. Some people might go so far as to say in identical ways. I don't believe that's true, but if we grant that there is certainly a similarity between what a religious person does or a believing person does and what a non-believing person does, the question arises, is the benefit of religion just in whatever that difference is? That a religious person does, a believing person does, that a different person might not do? Or is there a benefit to belief, a benefit to faith, even in that large part of life that overlaps? So the discussion will talk about why we should believe in God, not proving the existence of God. And we'll talk about why there is a difference between the two. Why we should believe in God, and then what effects does it have. But our goal is to do this a little bit differently than a class or than a lecture. In the sense that I will just set some basic principles in order to ground the discussion. But what we hope to do is to look at questions that you might have or that other people may have asked you that you don't quite know how to approach, how to think about, how to answer, or questions that you may not have resolved for yourself. And we will try to examine those issues that have come up in your own life as a believer or as a person who is trying to explain Islam or belief to people who may be skeptical or may be non-believers. What that means is that our discussion is not necessarily going to follow a logical order, because it is meant to be a response to questions that we have. But if necessary, in future sessions, or perhaps even at the end of this session, I will try to give a little bit of a logical order and structure to make sure that we are all able to get to the same page. So let's begin, inshallah. Please note that if you have questions that you've already thought up, or if you think of any questions during this session, you can ask them by raising your hand, and we will give priority to those of you who do have the courage to raise your hand and ask a question publicly, although it sometimes can be a little bit difficult to do so. But if you prefer to ask your question anonymously in writing, then that will also be possible, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can. So as I give my brief remarks, start thinking about those questions and formulating them, because that's what we're going to be doing for the majority of our time. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So the first point that I want to make is that in many cases people think about believing in God as an intellectual question. They frame it as a question of, can you prove the existence of God? And when it is framed as an intellectual question, then you're looking for a theological proof or a philosophical proof, or sometimes people look for various types of scientific proofs or evidence of the existence of God. And they began thinking about probability. Many of you are familiar with the different formulations of the argument from design, which is that everything in the world is so well calibrated for life to exist and for human life to exist that it's very, very improbable for this to have taken place without being designed. So these are, in a broad view, proofs or arguments for the existence of God. And they're fine so far as they go. In other words, there's nothing wrong with the philosophical or the theological or the rational question of, do we have arguments for the existence of God? And can we prove the existence of God? Using logic, using philosophy, using creation, or using science. But that is not the most important or the only or the most effective way to think about why you should be a believer. All of you are familiar with something that is known as Pascal's wager, I'm sure, or the hadith, which is narrated from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. When a person who didn't believe in God came to the Imam, and a similar formulation is ascribed to the philosopher Pascal, we would say that he may have taken it from our Imam, but the argument is somewhat similar. If the Imam said to somebody who didn't believe in God, that if you're right and you're not right, then we're all equal. You live your life, we live our life, and we die into nothingness. And whether you live 30 years or 70 years, if you're going to go into nothingness, it doesn't really make a whole lot of a difference. And whether you lived a wonderful life as a powerful, rich, healthy person, or a terribly difficult life as a poor, sick, oppressed person, again, when you divide it by infinity, you're all about equal. So if I avoided alcohol and all of these different kinds of temptations, and another person did not, in the grand scheme of things, we're not that far apart. And the Imam said that if we are right, meaning believers, then we're not equal, because you will be punished for your lack of belief or for your evil actions, and we will not. We will have salvation, and you will not have access to salvation. Now, that is not a proof of God's existence. It is not even an argument for God's existence. And there are various objections that have been raised to that framing of why you should believe in God. People sometimes do not appreciate what it was that Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam was trying to do. And so they raise objections. For example, what if God exists, but He doesn't want you to believe because of superstition or because of a scripture, and He wants you to place your faith in science? And so He punishes you for believing in an immanent God, or an interventionist God, as is often said. And He wants you to believe in the primacy and the universality of science. Or if we accept the logic that simply tells you that you should act as if you believe as a precaution, it doesn't actually tell you that you should believe as an article of faith. It simply tells you to act as if there is a God, in case there is. That doesn't translate to faith. These types of questions, they arise because some people assume that what the Imam was trying to do is to argue for the existence of God. You're safe if you believe in God. The Imam is not saying that you are safe or that you should believe in God because you're weighing the risk and the rewards. What the Imam was doing was disarming the opponent who looked at faith as either something that was foolish or something that could be easily dismissed. And therefore, when you look at the arguments or the evidence presented by believers, your response is a defensive response or a dismissive response. And then you're not able to evaluate them objectively and fairly and impartially. So the aim of the Imam was to say that this is something that you should take with humility. This is something that you should give consideration to. And the hadith continues, and the Imam did present why a person should believe in God affirmatively. But this calculation, this wager, as they say, if you believe in God, you are safe, and if you don't believe in God, you are not. That is meant to take the first step. The removal of one obstacle to belief in God, which is arrogance or dismissiveness. And that is often the most important step. So what we find in the Quran is that the Quran does not argue or prove the existence of God at all. The Quran mentions ayat, which are signs. And those signs can be the text of Revelation, or they can be the text of creation. The text of creation being a figurative phrase to refer to the very nature of creation. But creation is not meant to be a proof of God's existence. For us to say that, the various physical realities that exist within the solar system, within the universe, and on Earth are calibrated to allow human life or life in general to exist. That's not how the Quran talks about the ayat and the signs of God in creation. Instead, those signs are presented in the Quran as reflections of God. Reflections and emanations from God, but not as a proof of God. The proof, the reason why you should believe initially, is something more profound than an intellectual exercise. So let me explain the framework that the Quran is using. And during the question and answer session, we'll have time to explore the implications and any questions you may have about that. Let's begin by looking at verse 190 and 191 of the third chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Imran. Allah says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Inna fi khalqis samawati wal ardi wa ikhtilafil layli wan nahar la ayatin li ulil albab. In the creation of heavens and earth, and in the alternation of night and day, there are signs for the wise. So these are physical signs within the heavens and earth, within the universe. They're signs of God, not arguments or proofs of God's existence. لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ, those people who have intellect. And generally, we tend to associate intellect with a high IQ, generally with the type of intelligence that allows you to get a good job or earn a high income or get material success. And that is not how the Quran presents intellect, because you might be penny smart and pound foolish. You might be able to earn a lot of money but not do a lot of good for society or achieve fulfillment or satisfaction. Or you might achieve a level of happiness, but it is a fool's happiness where you think that you have a good life, but you're not actually a good person. So that is a superficial definition. Ulil albab is defined by the Quran itself. الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ. Those who remember God, they think of God, and they mention God, standing and sitting and on their sides, meaning whatever state they might be in life. وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And they think about the creation of heavens and earth. Now this verse tells us what the Quran perceives as the source of faith and the reason why we should believe. The explanation of this I'll give immediately after we look at these verses. So hopefully by the end of this discussion, something will click. Ulil albab, the wise, are not people with a high IQ, or people with an advanced degree, or people with power or material resources. That might be correlated with wisdom, or it might not be. Not that there's anything negative about those kinds of material credentials, but they don't automatically mean that a person has insight. A person who can live a meaningful life and a good life, an honorable life, that is a person who has intellect. And if a person has that honor, then it will help them succeed materially as well. But it's not a one-to-one correspondence. Material success is not the standard. As the Quran says, يَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا. O Allah, you did not create all that exists in vain. So the source of faith and the source of intellect is the realization that what exists is not in vain. Purpose is where you find your faith is rooted. Why and not how. And when you think about all of the questions that people have about God, a large number of them, they go back to the how and not the why of existence. So when evolution first became a widespread theory in Europe and in the Islamic world, it caused a crisis of faith for many people. But leaving aside the arguments for and against and about evolution, that whole discussion is about the how of creation, the mechanism by which creation may or may not have taken place. It doesn't tell you why. It's not asking or answering the question of why things exist. And so the whole question of a crisis of faith, because there is a theory about how things might have come to being, is a category mistake. It's not that we have to answer that question and say, is evolution compatible with faith or not? Right? Now, we will have to talk about that a little bit more. Because in a Christian context, if you believe that the Bible is the literal word of God, and evolution contradicts the story of creation in what you consider to be revealed truth, then there is a problem. Not a theological crisis about the existence of God, but a crisis or a question of whether this revealed text is true or is literally true. That's a separate question, though, than what we're talking about. What we're talking about is if you find out how something works or how it has come into existence, that does not necessarily tell you why. It might help you if you as an engineer can understand how something was designed and how it operates. That might give you a little bit of understanding of what purpose the inventor or the creator may have had. And that is why the Quran says these are ayat, signs. But they are not the same question. So all of these objections that come from scientific discoveries, they are a form of a category error, because they are confusing the question of how with the question of why. The origin of faith is not in being able to ask the question, how did the universe come into being? Was there a Big Bang? Was there a particular manner of creation or another manner of creation? Are there multiple universes? What is the time scale of creation? Is it thousands or millions or billions of years? Those are not questions that have a bearing on faith, because all of those are questions of how. Thank you. The question of where faith originates, though, is as described in this verse 191 of Surah Al-Imran. رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا. Let me also make one other point related to this before I move on. When people get into the theological discussion, sometimes I'm reading a philosophical proof and it seems to make sense, or I might have an objection. Know that even if you have an objection, there are theologians and philosophers smarter than you who did believe in God. And if you think you have a solid proof for the existence of God, there are theologians and philosophers smarter than you who don't believe in God. So when you back up a little bit, you should realize that is not necessarily the best avenue for a person to base their decisions on, because we know that our intellectual prowess is not necessarily better than everybody else. Even if I'm convinced that God doesn't exist, for example, because of my intellectual reasoning. Or I'm convinced that God does, it works both ways. Or I'm convinced that God does exist because of my intellectual reasoning. In both cases, when I back up, I note that I might think of something 2 weeks from now, or 2 years from now, or 20 years from now, that will show me where I went wrong. Where the objection I had to the proof of God's existence was wrong, or that argument that I thought was solid was wrong. It's not a stable way to arrive at faith. But since it's a question that pertains to all of us, high IQ, medium IQ, and maybe those of us who are willing to admit that our IQ might not be better than everybody else, right? Intellectual, non-intellectual, whatever kind of person we are, whatever kind of education we have, the question of faith is one that pertains to every one of us. So it's a question that we should ask in terms of purpose and meaning. If I want to boil it down very simply, do you believe in your heart and in your soul that right and wrong exists? That there is a reality to right and wrong? Aside from a social construct, aside from simply an emotional state, but that something is right or wrong inherently in its being. That is the belief in God. You might not call it God, because that's a separate discussion of what are the implications of believing in right and wrong. In Islamic theology, that is not a question of do you believe in God. That is a question of what are the attributes of God. But if you believe that there is right and wrong, that right is real and not just a matter of convenience, not just a matter of social organization, not just a matter of utility, benefit and harm, not just an emotional response to the world, but real. Then you believe in God. And we move on to say what are the implications of that. Even if you just say, I believe in karma, I don't believe in the Islamic conception of God. Fine, call it karma, call it God. But that is the origin. As the Quran says, رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا. You have not created in vain, meaning the world is not batil, it is haqq. The opposite of batil is haqq. And haqq is one of the names of God. So if you believe in right, you believe in God. And then the only question is, when we say in the Islamic concept truth or haqq, we mean God in all of his attributes of perfection. And so the question is, what are those attributes of perfection? Haqq is God. What does haqq mean? That's the next discussion. Which is why the verse continues, Subhanaka. Subhanaka means that, oh Allah, you are free of all defect and all blemish. So what the Quran is saying is that if you believe in purpose, then you believe in God. And then to understand God, you have to understand what is perfection, and any perfection is an attribute of God. Any blemish or any defect is absent and is negated from God. فَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. And the consequence of that is then to seek protection from God in this world and in the next. The other verse that I wanted to look at is a verse of Surah Ibrahim, verse number 10. And in this verse, Allah describes the message of the prophets. Once again, the message of the prophets is not one that treats the existence of God that is something which is in doubt and needs to be proved, but rather as something that is inherent to our being, and so it needs to be brought out. I want to emphasize again, that's not to say that those proofs of God's existence that many of us studied in Sunday school and that often take up a lot of paper and time in theology discussions, that they are not useful. They're very useful in helping clear our minds and helping us understand intricate concepts, but that is not the origin of faith. You can know something, but not have confidence in it. So what we're speaking about is why you should have confidence in God, why you should believe in God, and how that should affect your life. So in Surah Ibrahim, the Quran says, قَالَتْ رُسُلُهُمْ. Every prophet came to his nation and said, أَفِي اللَّهِ شَكْ. Are you doubting God? That's by default, you should believe in God. فَاطِرِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Creator of heavens and earth. So the Quran is saying, in effect, the default position is that God exists. Meaning that purpose and meaning exists in life. The question is, what are the attributes of God? So these are two verses that we can use to understand the Quranic perspective. The existence of God is self-evident because God is the origin of our own existence and all else that exists. The difficulty is in understanding the attributes of God or the names of God, because we live in a material world and God is beyond matter. And so it's difficult for us to wrap our minds around something that transcends, that goes beyond our limited senses and perception. Not that we do not have a connection or an ability to believe. A few additional points that I want to make before we move to the discussion and the question and answer phase. Have any of you heard of the concept of non-overlapping magisteria? Stephen J. Gould, theologian, Catholic theologian, introduced that. Can you briefly explain the concept? So this is a theological concept which is debated in the West. Stephen J. Gould, many of you may be familiar with his work in evolutionary biology and the concept of punctuated equilibrium. His resolution for the conflict of science and religion is known as the idea of non-overlapping magisteria. If you can just briefly give us an idea of what that is.
I can try, I'll probably get it wrong. I think his idea was that science, because it deals with the observed reality, with the material reality, is incapable of ever proving the existence of something that is not encapsulated by matter. And I think in the end, the discussion is not so far, Maulana, from the how versus the why in the way he presents. He says science and faith, the problem is that every scientific discovery somehow wants to claw at faith, but by definition and by design, science is not able to comment or enter into that set which is faith. It's non-overlapping. The two sets are non-overlapping. That's what I remember briefly.
That's a good description. I hope that was understandable. So think of it like art. Right? If there's a beautiful masterpiece of art, a painting, right? I can talk about the type of canvas, and in the Renaissance period, what did they make their dyes from, and what materials did they use to create different colors, and right? That is a discussion about art. And then there is a discussion about the significance and the influences and the meaning of that art. Those are non-overlapping magisteria. Meaning when I'm describing the materials and the dyes and how the painting took place, that does not tell you anything really about the artist and what makes this artist worth millions of dollars per painting and that artist not. And when you have that second discussion of say, the meaning of art or the beauty of the art, that doesn't necessarily tell you anything about the mechanics of how the art worked. And art is one of the examples that is often used in the discussion of non-overlapping magisteria, both for and against. So Stephen Jay Gould's argument was that science is asking and answering one set of questions. And theology is asking and answering another set of questions about meaning and about values. Science is asking and answering questions about facts. And these are two magisteria, meaning these are two realms. These are two kingdoms. And they're separate. They don't overlap. So, faith, values, does not tell you about facts. It tells you about meaning and values. And science tells you about facts, but not about meaning and values. And his theory was that it doesn't overlap from both sides. So science cannot take away the value of theology, but theology also cannot intervene in science because they both have completely separate domains. And that has been critiqued and adjusted. Richard Dawkins, for example, very famously said that that's not true. If religious people discovered, for example, that we found just to take an extreme example, we found the body of Prophet Jesus. He didn't say Prophet Jesus, but if we found the body of Jesus, and it was discovered that he was born without a father, religious people would run away with that and say this is a miraculous proof in the truth of the virgin conception of Jesus. And so religious people will only use this idea of non-overlapping magisteria if it suits them. But if there is a miracle, a scientific miracle in the Quran, for example, or a scientific miracle that proves the truth of Christianity, then they will not say it's non-overlapping, they'll say our religion is true because of science. So that was the argument made by Richard Dawkins, and then there are other adjustments to that as well. From an Islamic perspective, we don't believe in the idea of non-overlapping magisteria, i.e., that there is a science that cannot impinge upon theology or a theology that cannot impinge upon science. But it's a useful concept to help us understand the different domains, even if we don't believe that they are separate and we don't believe that they are overlapping, we believe that they are identical. And why are they identical? Because Allah created, and when He created everything with a moral purpose and potential. And so the act of creation is both the creation of a fact and the creation of a value. The act of creation by God is the act of bringing something into being, and it is the act of putting a proper place for everything within being. So for example, if you buy a new house, it's unfurnished, and then you start to furnish it. Everything that you purchase, if we compare that to creation, you're also simultaneously going to be thinking about where is it going to go. You don't just go to, I'm a simple person, so I'll use IKEA. Apologies to those of you who would never be caught dead in IKEA. Right? You don't just go to IKEA, say, let me buy this, and then we'll figure out if it's going to go somewhere in our house or we'll put it in the shed or the garage. So the very act of creation is the act of defining a proper place for everything. And so it can't be non-overlapping. It can't even be overlapping. It is the same thing. But then the process of discovery of what is created is certainly not the same thing as the process of discovery of why it was created. So if I can understand the biology of existence, that doesn't mean that I understand the proper place of existence. So in terms of discovery as a human being, there is a difference between a question of why and a question of how. There is a difference between a question of fact and a question of value. But in terms of existence itself, those are the same thing. Because God's creation is God's creation of facts and God's creation of value and purpose. Does that make sense? So if you'd like to do more research on that, there is an entire debate about the question of whether the realm of science and the realm of religion are separate, or in Stephen Gould's formulation, non-overlapping, or whether they are overlapping. But the Islamic perspective, as I briefly described, is that God's creation, by its very act of creating, is an act of creating and defining haqq. And so then the job of religion is simply to explain what that haqq is. And that is why religion is not text. Because any means by which God tells us what the proper place of things is is religion. And by and large, a big portion of how God tells us what the proper place of things is through our conscience, not through revelation. The vast majority of things that come in Revelation, they are things that reinforce what our conscience tells us and refines it, but very rarely adjusts it. So when the Quran says, "Inna ad-deena inda Allahi al-Islam," the only deen in the eyes of God is Islam. That's not a statement of one religion being right as opposed to another. Deen, if we want to simplify, is your response to creation, your response to God. The only response to existence is to submit to reality, to submit to truth. And therefore, Islam, it's not a coincidence that the name of our religion is Islam or submission. It simply means that when you discover something, you submit to it. If I discover a scientific truth and I reject it, then that is kufr, because it was created by God. And if I discover a religious truth or a revelational truth and I reject it, that is kufr, because I'm rejecting something that was sent by God. And that's why Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, when he was asked to define iman and kufr, he said that if you take the pit of a date and you call it a pebble, and then you believe in that, that is kufr. It's insignificant, right? It's junk. It doesn't really matter whether it's a date pit or whether it's a pebble. You pick it up and you throw it in the garbage can. But if something is true and you mischaracterize it and then you make that something that you believe in between you and God, that is the essence of faith. The Imam chose an example that is about the existence of reality and not, if you say Maghrib is 4 rak'ah as opposed to 3 rak'ah, because it's the same principle. And that is the essence of Islam. So to summarize, from the Islamic perspective, the origin of faith is in the recognition that life has purpose and meaning. And then the questions that come are, what does truth or what does purpose or what does meaning entail? Those are questions of the attributes of God and not questions about the existence of God. The question that remains is reasons why people may have a hesitation to believe in God. Objections that come to people's mind, that why does evil exist? If God exists, then why this and why that? And those are an obstacle, a potential obstacle that we sometimes need to resolve in order to be able to move on to the question of what are the attributes of God. Right? That's not an essential question. It is, in general, I think most people will say, yes, I believe that my existence has meaning. I believe that truth and right and wrong exist. I believe that being cruel to an innocent animal or an innocent person is wrong, not just because I feel it, not just because it might backfire, but because it is intrinsically wrong. So the objection is not at that level. But the questions and the potential objections, they come because our intellect is not quite developed enough to appreciate the wisdom of how God manages the affairs of the world. And so we say, why does evil exist? Why does this exist? Why is there suffering? Or whatever other questions may come. So that is the structure of the questions and objections that people often have about faith. I will stop there, inshallah. Hopefully that gives us a basis to continue the discussion. And now I will open the floor. I'll call our moderators back if you'd like to make any arrangements or any announcements about how to ask questions. and then we can begin the question and answer phase. Do we need to take a break for people to get refreshments, or is everybody still awake and with us? Who's hungry? Well, if you're hungry, you can go ahead and get yourself a snack. But please go ahead.
Okay, so we have an online form for questions as well if people want to anonymously ask a question, but we will prioritize live questions over the online one. It's on just quiet. Can you hear me now?
Just a little less.
Okay, so if anyone wants to start the discussion off with a live question, those will be prioritized over the online ones. Okay. We'll do one of the online ones first then.
You may want to come this way a little bit.
One of our first questions is, how should be approach Hindus who believe in one supreme power, but who have made sub-deities for his manifestations? How is the Hindu approach fundamentally different from our use of wasila for prophets and imams?
It's a very good question, actually. In the Islamic conception, the unity of God is the fundamental principle that defines not just Islamic theology, but Islamic law and ethics, and every other field of human learning as well. Underlying creation is the reality that all that exists in its material existence and in its purpose originates in God. And therefore there is nothing that is contradicting the will of God. But as existence comes from the highest level down to our level of material existence, if you can think of it kind of as a gradual descent from a perfect realm to the material realm, complexity comes into the picture. And when there is complexity, then there are seeming contradictions. And polytheistic communities, they saw, for example, growth in spring and destruction in autumn and winter. And so they said there must be a God of creation and a God of destruction, because the God who creates a beautiful spring cannot be the same God who destroys everything and causes warfare or causes desolation of winter. The God of wisdom would not be the God of say, art, because they are entirely different spheres of being. Or the God of wisdom is not the God of warfare. Why did polytheism die out? Well, one of the reasons why polytheism died out, if we want to take sort of a societal and a historical view of it, is that collectively the human imagination became developed enough to realize that winter and spring both fit into a very intricate and a very beautiful harmony. And without the desolation of winter, there could not be the beauty of spring. And so it's not two contradictory powers behind that, but rather the same power, the same wisdom, the same creative force and energy. So that's why polytheism died out, not in terms of being wrong, it was always wrong. But before society was able to see that deeper harmony, it was kind of difficult for many people to appreciate that no, there's not two gods fighting and then one winning, but rather a single purpose and a single wisdom that was beneath it. Prophet Nuh alayhi salam preached for 950 years that message, and very few people believed. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa preached not even for 23 years. Right from those very first years in Mecca, there was nothing that the polytheists really could say in response. The battle was lost in Mecca before the migration, before the conquest. In fact, that's why there needed to be a migration, because they didn't have anything to respond. Their political and intellectual and cultural force was spent. Right? That's not only because the Prophet was of a higher rank than Prophet Nuh alayhi salam. Their message was the same message. The bigger change was that society had advanced to a point where, on an intellectual level, on a moral level, and on even a cultural level, polytheism no longer had answers. So now, the question of what should we do with polytheistic religions? The question was about Hinduism. But the same question is valid for Christians as well. Because if Christians believe that God has three elements, Godhead has three elements, then that is polytheism. It's valid even for Muslims. Because if somebody believes that God is in the heavens, that's in essence a polytheistic belief. Because anytime you say that God is in a certain place, then you have ascribed a limitation to God, and God is beyond all limitation and all constriction, all blemish. So it's also a question of Islam. It's also a question of dealing with people of the book, and of course with dealing with people outside. So this is a question that is answered not in terms of principle, because as the Quran says, most people, when they believe in God, they believe in God with an element of shirk. Why? Because our conception of God is not refined enough to negate all blemish and all defect from God. So we believe in God. We even believe God is perfect, and then we have an image of God in our mind where there are limitations. That's a limitation of our intellect and our being. So it's not a principle, but it is a legal determination. In effect, God says that this level of shirk you are to treat as shirk. And this level of shirk you are to ignore for some social or religious purpose. Imagine if you could only eat the meat slaughtered by somebody who had a perfect conception of Tawheed. Right? You'd have to take every goat and every chicken maybe to Najaf or to Qum, and you'd have to have maybe one or two people in the whole world slaughtering everybody's meat, because all of us would have a deficient conception of Tawheed. Imagine if the only marriage that would be valid is somebody who had true Tawheed. Wouldn't make sense. It's a social and a legal concession that God has made. And that's based on a wisdom. So there's nothing wrong with believing that there is barakah in a material being that has been given to it by God. The question is, did God authorize you to believe that or not? And so when the Quran objects to shirk, it doesn't say that inherently there can't be barakah or blessings in the material world. It says, these are names that you and your people have made. In here, illa asma'un sammaytumuha. You made it up. God did not issue you an authority or a sultan to do these things. Meaning that if God had given you the sultan, then that would be fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with a black stone being blessed, or a place being blessed, or a certain time being blessed, if God authorizes it. So that's why we have one group of people that we call Muslims. They've met that standard that God has said is needed, that minimum standard to define a Muslim community. And it is to define a community. Then there is another concentric circle of people who are considered to be people of the book. The various schools of thought within Judaism or Christianity, they may have certain beliefs that with a fine-toothed comb, they are not really tawheed. They are polytheistic in nature. But because they share a certain spiritual lineage, we treat them differently in theological terms than somebody else. Right? That is a social and a legal question. The same thing applies to people who are outside of people of the book, like Hindus. Right? The idea is that Allah has revealed certain laws to organize society. And that does not mean that that is the basis by which He is going to judge people in the hereafter. So it might be that somebody is a member of a people of the book, but they will be judged harsher than somebody who we do not treat as a person of the book, but they believe in one God, and they may be rewarded for their belief in the hereafter. That determination of salvation in the hereafter, that is a theological discussion, or it is a matter of God's wisdom in knowing what is in the heart of a person. Our dealing with a person is a legal question that relates to forming a community. And those two do not necessarily always agree. Does that make sense? All right. So we can maybe have 2 live questions and then come back to the written questions.
Bismillah. So, me, myself, I'm the kind of person that I don't really, like, when I prove God to myself and prove Islam to myself, I don't care about proving it against other people. Like, getting into debates with atheists or Christians, I'm like, I don't really care what that person thinks. But is this something that is actually an Islamic perspective? Does Islam tell us that we should care about proving our religion to other people, proving, I guess, our philosophy to being superior? Or should we care about, just proving Allah to myself and living my best life?
Should we do that? Should we have 2 or 3 questions and then? Sure, we can try that. So your question is, should we try to convince other people, right? And argue that our religion is right? All right.
Well, the question about khair or shar, or justice and injustice, you said a few words about it. This question comes up from the non-believers, and also comes up as a doubt from the believer's self. If we believe in God, it has to be a just God. And if it is a just God, then we see injustice all over the place. And injustice, is more prevalent if you as compared to justice. So how do you answer that question for the believer and then also for the non-believer?
Sure.
Is there any other questions? Are there any other questions?
I just have a simple question. Can one believe and still have unexplained questions? Is it important for you to have answer to all the questions to really believe, or you can have strong belief and still have questions?
All right, very good. All right, so those are 3 questions. The first is, should we try to convince? So there is a tendency among some people within the Muslim community and in other religions to proselytize, to try to convince people and convert people. And Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam, they, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, they did not focus or emphasize proselytizing. Now, part of that was because of taqiyya, because it would have been extremely dangerous for the imams themselves and for their followers to actively call people to love of Ahlul Bayt, and then for that to be known in society. But part of that is based on a Quranic principle, which is that guidance comes from God. So we're not marketers or salespeople for Islam. Right? The most that we can do is to facilitate belief. But we are not to convince, we're not in our existence able, and we are not authorized or deputized to convert people to Islam. So what that means is that the primary focus of our faith is to be able to strengthen and deepen our own relationship with our faith in order to be able to model the life of a believer, which does require intellectual and practical commitment to Islam. So that when you live your life as a believer, if people have questions about that, if people perhaps are inquisitive or attracted to it, you are able to articulate. But not because you feel like, if I know how to win this debate, then I can convert one person or many people. That's not your priority. That is the job of God. And that's in general within Islam. You want to make yourself as highly qualified as you can, educationally, intellectually, experientially, spiritually, for you to be able to meet whatever responsibility God may give you. But then you're not supposed to demand a particular responsibility. Allah, I trained, and I really need to be put, when the Imam comes, inshallah, and if, inshallah, all of us are alive, I learned French, and, I got these degrees, so I want to be appointed ambassador of Imam Mahdi to, a plum country somewhere in the tropics. Right? You want to be qualified. But then what the appointment is, that's not something that I am supposed to try to demand. Does that answer your question? So you want to be able to have as many of the qualifications in a comprehensive sense as you can, so that you can better serve God's purpose. But then the utilization of that comes from God and not from my expectation or my demand. Many of us, we kind of say that, well, when God tells me to learn French, then I'll learn French, hypothetically speaking. Right? When God tells me to develop my potential in whatever capacity, that's when I'll do it. No, I should be trying to develop that right now, but I shouldn't be trying to impose a utilization. That should come, where and how it is needed. So that's a different perspective than the idea that we should go out and proselytize. The question of evil, right? So the simple answer to the question of evil is that people assume evil exists because they assume that we are able to know the pros and cons of a particular decree that God may make. And that is why it is often easier for us to see the wisdom of something in the theoretical than it is for us to see the wisdom of something in practice. Like right now, if you tell me that, sometimes being sick is better for a person than to be healthy, because it gives a chance to spend time with family and not to be distracted by career and by fleeting types of concerns. It might give you a chance to think about the meaning of life. I'll say, yeah, that's very true. Then when I get sick, I say, God, why me? I didn't want this. Why can't you not only make me better, but also put my maslahat and my interest in health, if you control what is good and what is evil? Why is it easier in the theoretical than in the practical? Because when it comes to us, we kind of assume that we know what is good for us. Whereas in the theoretical, we admit, because the truth is that we don't know. So the question of whether evil exists is really a question of, do you know the higher purpose of God or not? And so the answer, there are answers that are given in philosophy. I don't want to get into that right now because they're a little intricate. Right? In summary, if I want to just say it in one word, the answer that is given in Islamic philosophy in general is that evil does not exist. Evil is simply a lack of fulfilling the potential that God has created. But whenever God creates potential. So what we perceive as evil is just the non-actualization of that potential. Yazid was not evil, because what came from God was the existence of Yazid. And he had all of the potential to be a good person. What we call evil is really just that he did not actualize that, right? Now the same thing will apply with a little bit more explanation to natural disasters, or an earthquake or a tsunami. But I don't want to get into the philosophical side of it in more detail. What I do want to focus on is the theological part of it, which is that if you admit that a student cannot always know when the teacher is being too harsh, because the teacher knows what are the consequences of a bad decision, right? What level of punishment is appropriate for somebody who is careless with a radioactive material in a lab? Well, that depends on how much damage can be caused by that material. Maybe having your access to the lab revoked or being fired might seem harsh to me for a first offense. But it might be entirely appropriate if you know the actual depth of that transgression. And I, as a human being, never know the full measure of interest and harm in creation. So I can never really sit in judgment and say, for one person to die of an earthquake or a famine is okay, but when 5 people die or when 5,000 people die, that's too much. You know what I mean? Because it's only when you are able to appreciate what are the interests and the harms that God is looking at that you're able to make that judgment. So on a theological level, it's arrogant to ask the question. Now, of course, don't answer that. Don't give that answer to a person when they say, if God exists, why is there evil? Don't say it's arrogant of you to ask that question. Because it's a very common question, and it's not going to be helpful if you say that. But I'm just explaining that in terms of, it's part of our society to kind of assume that we should know. And it's an arrogance that, by the way, is not separate from our human nature. So when Khadr alayhi salam killed that innocent boy, even Prophet Musa, who was a prophet, said, why did you do this? Right? Because, for Prophet Musa, I won't call it arrogance, but I would call it the call of the fitrah, this is not right. So it's not bad. But then, it's important for us to recognize that call of the fitrah is because God wants us never to take an innocent life. That's why it's such a powerful call. When I come and I say, God, you should not take an innocent life, God will say, I'm the one who gave life. I know when and how to take it. That's when it becomes arrogance. And that distinction is the theological distinction. Then we can talk about specific examples, and how is that evil not really something that exists, even if it seems like it exists to us. But I hope that level is enough for the purposes of our talk today. If there's any other examples that you have a hard time understanding, then feel free to bring them up and we can talk about them in a little bit more depth. The last question was, do we have to have answers or can we have questions? I think the flip side is a better question. If you don't have questions, can you have faith? Right? Because the reality is that the whole purpose of faith is to say that I cannot know on my own and I need God to take me by the hand. Right? That's the basic distinction between the Islam of Ahlul Bayt and the Islam of those who who rejected Ahlul Bayt. Hasbuna Kitabullah was at essence the idea that we no longer need God. He sent his book, so we'll cut off the need for a connection to God, the need for questions, and we'll say we'll just take it at whatever level has already been relieved. Right? That is the secularization of religion. So true faith requires you to have unanswered questions. And in fact, when we believe in the appearance of the Imam of our time, the most important reason why we need the Imam is not to eradicate evil. You know, if you'll permit me a little bit of humor, if Bernie Sanders wins this election, we'll eradicate a lot of evil, hopefully. Right? I say that half humorously. But maybe the expense of college education and the expense of healthcare and these things, some of that might be resolved. The point is that that's not the only reason we need the Imam. Of course, even justice at a deeper level requires a ma'asum. You can just solve a few superficial things. But the real reason we need a ma'asum is not to punish evildoers, to eliminate poverty, to eliminate oppression. The real reason is that our existence is a question of us reconnecting with Allah. Living in the material world, but being connected to the infinite world. The Imam is as-sabab al-muttasilu bayna as-sama'i wal-ard, the bridge that connects the infinite to the finite. And if we need the Imam for a deeper resolution of injustice, if we need the Imam for a deeper resolution of poverty, for example, or prejudice, or racism, then it is because those are moral questions before they are political or economic or intellectual questions. So the essence of faith is that you should always have questions, or you should always feel that even my certainty is ignorance. Even my knowledge is ignorance until it is affirmed by a ma'asum. That is, not that you don't use your certainty, you live according to the certainty because it's a gift from God, but you recognize that it is in need of affirmation and it is in need of completion by a ma'asum. Everything else is secondary. So you need to have questions, but those questions need to be questions that are disciplined questions, meaning they are directed towards where those questions can get answered. So, you come to me with those foundational questions and you're setting yourself up for failure. Because I can give you an answer that I found in a book of tafsir or hadith. I cannot give you a question that is the preserve of a ma'asum. So you need to have questions, but those questions need to be disciplined questions, meaning we need to know where to go to get the provisional answers when we don't have access to Imam, and the final answers when we do have access to the Imam, in order to provide to get insight. If a person does not have questions, or does not have uncertainty about all manners of their decisions, then they are weak in faith. They are weak in faith. Then they will not have a motivation for dua because they think, I got this. I can earn my livelihood. So they're not going to ask Allah for their rizq. They're going to go and earn their rizq. If they don't have questions about how to earn their rizq and what is halal, what is not halal, then they're not going to be wondering about the moral implications of their decisions. From the most simple kind of things that are easy for us to figure out, to the most existential questions. That is actually what the marginalization of Ahlul Bayt stole from the Muslim Ummah. Because when you don't have a ma'soom, then you're forced to kind of say that all questions can be answered by consultation. All questions can be answered by a superficial reference to the Quran. So you make religion shallow, and then you make religiosity a question of practice, rather than a question of humility and acquiring depth. All right. So we do have maybe about, I would say, 10 or 15 more minutes to ask additional questions. Please.
Do any of the ladies have any questions first?
Ladies must have questions.
Alaikum assalam.
You said, it is not our responsibility to spread Islam, but then how should we exercise the Amr bil Ma'ruf?
Good question. Thank you. I think we'll do the same thing. We'll get maybe 3 questions, and then we'll answer them in order.
So my question is about what you explained in terms of creation of evil, in which you said Allah doesn't create evil, but it's whatever, the person doesn't meet the potential. So how do you explain that with regards to Jahannam?
Sure. Good question. I think there was a question in the back as well.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. The question is, when we started with this idea that the Quran said that all the signs of God are not actually the questions of proof of God, but they are signs leading to God. Then the foremost topical question remains, then what is the argument in favor of proof of God? What is the proof of God actually? And yes, we discussed about the 2 non-overlapping spheres or domains or realms. I was thinking at the same time, yeah, science is one domain, and it has no answer for vice. It has answers for power. Theology is another domain which attempts to answer why. But philosophy is also one such area which answers why, but without saying it is so because of the revelation or because it came here in scripture or in other sources. So what is the proof of God? That is
Sure. So I'll start with the 3rd question because it's the most related to our topic, and then we'll go to the other 2 questions, inshallah, in order, or in reverse order. So the answer that I presented is that we don't need a proof of God's existence because the existence of God is the default position of every human soul when we look within us and within our conscience. The only question we have to ask, and inshallah we can explore that in our coming sessions, are what are the attributes of that God? Because every one of us innately and irrevocably believes in haqq, believes in right and wrong. And that itself is God. Now, there are different paths to discuss the signs of God. One of them that we're all familiar with is the intellectual path, the arguments for the existence of God. But there's also an aesthetic path that you can take through the beauty of God's creation. There is a quote-unquote scientific path that you could take with various formulations of the argument from design. There is an experiential path that you can take through religious experience. So there's different paths that people have taken, and all of them can have validity in their own right, but they all have pitfalls. So for example, if I say that I saw a vision of the Virgin Mary in a dream, and therefore I believe that Catholic Christianity is correct, but what if the person I thought was the Virgin Mary was really the Lady Fatima Zahra salamullahi alayha? Just my vision is not going to clarify that. That doesn't mean it's invalid. It just means that there is a potential pitfall, which is that I might not be able to properly or fully interpret an experience or a vision or a perceived miracle that I may have experienced. That's not to say it's invalid, but it's to say that you have to recognize the limitations of that path. The intellectual path has its own limitations. The aesthetic path has its own limitations. The essence is that which is innate to our existence. But the intellectual path, in spite of its limitations and its potential pitfalls, can bring you closer to God. The arguments, the philosophical and theological proofs. But they can potentially also lead a person to various dead ends or to various, let's say, meandering paths because of the limitations of our own intellects. So the best approach is to strengthen that inner grounding of the essence of our faith. And this is why one of the attributes of believers is الَّذِينَ يَصِلُونَ مَا أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِهِ أَن يُوصَلْ. They connect those things that God has said to connect. Why? Because when you have a lot of connections, what is strengthened is your conscience. Right? What happens when people acquire power and when people acquire money is they no longer depend on other people for their well-being. And gradually, and this has actually been studied, it becomes more and more difficult for me to even understand what is going on when you express certain emotions in your face. Why does it become difficult? Because my well-being doesn't depend on knowing when you're angry and when I need to shut up. Right? Because I can buy you off or I can sue you into silence. And gradually I don't even have the ability to perceive it. If I have connections though, even when I'm high and mighty, I have relationships with my relatives, poor and rich. I don't isolate myself into a similar enclave of, say, highly educated or highly wealthy people. Then my conscience will stay alive. And I might have all of that privilege, but my conscience is not going to isolate me. And so I will be able to have the basis of faith. So, to summarize, the intellectual arguments for the existence of God are great. Experience as a reinforcement of faith is great. But it's only going to help you to the extent that that core of your faith, which is based in your conscience, is well nourished. Right? That core needs to be watered and nourished in order for the intellect and the experience and the spiritual musings, for example, to be able to bear fruit. I hope that at least partially answers your question. We can come back to it. Second question was about if we believe that God does not create evil, then why did he create Jahannam? This is a broader question, but I want to just raise one summary point about the existence of punishment in the hereafter. From the Islamic perspective, in the Quran and in Ahadith, punishment in the hereafter is not the consequence of your actions, but it is the reality of your actions themselves. And so the question is not why did God create hell? The question is why did God create free will? Those of us who are parents, we've all experienced this where we said to our kids, do you want to go to the masjid tonight? And then they said no, and we said, sorry, I didn't really mean it as a question, we're going. And they're like, why did you ask me? Right? So we've all made that mistake, once or twice, right? Either God is going to give you a choice, or He's not. But there's no meaning to giving choice if there is no choice. So what God did is He gave us free will. All Jahannam is our exercise of our free will. He gave us fire. But if we can only use the fire to give light and heat to cook, but not to burn ourselves, then we don't really have a choice. Right? If God is going to grab away our free will every time we make a mistake, then we don't have choice. So again, when I said evil doesn't exist, what I mean is that what we perceive of as evil, because we're looking at it from a limited vantage point, in reality, all Jahannam is the fact that free will and the consequences, good or bad, of our actions are a gift that God has given us. Is free will a gift? Yes, it's the greatest gift that humanity has been given, that even angels were not given. Right? The consequences of that free will are that we can go to paradise or we can go to hell. But it's not anything extra that God is putting in from His pocket to punish us. That's a short answer to a much more detailed question. And sister, your question about Amr bil Ma'ruf. So when I say that we're not responsible for spreading our faith, what I mean is that we should not think of ourselves as responsible for the spreading of faith. We do have a responsibility to our faith. And all of the laws of Islam, they are there to affirm a community that can get together to honor Allah. And that honoring of Allah provides benefits to society. Part of that community that gets together to honor Allah is encouraging others to do what is good, discouraging others from doing what is evil, teaching others when they are ignorant. All of those are fulfilling our responsibility to our faith. But that doesn't mean that we are spreading Islam or we are responsible for Islam. Right? The religion is God's. God has appointed a prophet and imams to be in charge of the religion. We are responsible to Islam, not responsible for Islam. When we feel responsible for Islam, then we start to make decisions that are perhaps above our pay grade, and we do more damage than good. And that is why these proselytizing religions, you all know when you see two young people dressed in suits walking down your neighborhood, you decide to turn off the lights and maybe lock the door, unless you have a lot of free time on your hand. Right? There's always a backlash that comes. When you feel responsible to your religion, then you come from a position of humility and service, and you do try to affirm those values. So it's a different perspective, because we don't measure our success, for example, by, we've converted this many people. If we convert 0 people, but we've deepened our connection to our faith, and we're ready to offer education about Islam if somebody is willing to take that, we're not withholding ourselves, then that might have much more long-term benefit than if we convert 20,000 people and then they leave Islam the next day. Right? So the point is that we do ask the question, should we start interfaith initiatives? Should we spend more energy on those interfaith initiatives? I'm not saying it's not important. What I'm saying is the perspective that we take is that I'm responsible to this religion to uphold and affirm. I'm not responsible for this religion, so I don't measure my success in quantitative terms. I measure my success in terms of the depth of my commitment and my readiness to serve. And that might take a private or it may take a public form. One of the meanings that has been mentioned for the famous hadith of our 11th Imam, Imam Hassan Askari alayhi salatu wasalam, that our grandmother Fatima Zahra was God's proof for us, is that she represented that hidden, that inner aspect of faith. She didn't have a long life. We don't know a lot of details of her life, fewer than any other of the ma'sumin. We don't have a large number of ahadith from her. The very few ahadith and khutbah and du'as that we have from her are very beautiful, but they're not a very large number. It's not a large corpus. But it was that depth of her being that our imams drew on in their expression of Islam. Right? When God promised Bani Israel the existence of Isa alayhi salam, He gave them Maryam first. Salamun alayha. And that was a question. But the role of whether Lady Maryam as the mother of Isa alayhi salam or Lady Fatima as the mother of our imams, after Imam Ali, that role, if it represents anything, it is the depth, the inner aspect of Islam, which is the true source of its strength. So from the eyes of the material world, this was a marginalized, losing bet to support Ahlul Bayt. But from the spiritual eyes, all of the bounty that came to Muslims of all schools of thought, it came from that source. So that's what I mean by a responsibility to Islam, not a responsibility for Islam. It's not that you're going to do things completely differently. It's that your measure of success is going to be completely different. So I hope that we got some answers. I know there are other questions that we have submitted on the forum that we didn't quite get to. And there might be other questions that you have, but this was always intended to be the first of a number of sessions. And so with your permission, I'd like to hear from you what kinds of questions and what kinds of discussions you would like us to have in the future so that we will be able to continue this series of discussions, the goal being to better understand and then to better be able to fulfill the teachings of our religion. So getting more understanding is important, but it's not just a matter of, wow, that made sense or that clicked. The goal is to then better uphold the teachings of our religion. So we have about 15 minutes until it is Maghrib time. Please, not with questions necessarily for us to answer right now, but areas of Islamic practice that you wish to have more knowledge about and that you would want to volunteer in order to bring to fruition. So not, for example, well, you guys should do this or people should do this, but what are the things that you would be enthusiastic about participating in and volunteering for and making sure that they can be accomplished. And so let's hear from as many of you as we have time for. Because we do want the future discussions and events to be managed and to be governed by all of your participation, and not to be sort of a top-down kind of approach to our Islamic events. Alaikum assalam.
So I think one of the questions that comes about a lot is about the roles of gender-specific roles and responsibilities and gender equality in Western sense versus Islamic sense. And I know we have a lot of answers from that we've been given, but I think just to have a more deeper understanding of why there are certain gender gender-specific roles and why there are equality or lack thereof apparently.
Sure.
I also have a suggestion, which is that science and technology has expanded the set of things that can be done. And in the past, the Sharia, in something Sharia announces what you should do or should not do out of a set of actions that humankind can do. But when science and when technology expands the can-do set, then the question is, there are, what part of that new set of things that were not possible 1400 years ago but have now become possible? There are, organ donation. There are lots of questions in this space, like with medicinal advances that are coming up, and I think they will exponentially increase with DNA targeted treatments and also something in that space. I don't know what your understanding of biology, but I'm sure you would have been exposed to these types of questions. So I think one session on those types of issues would be useful.
So the question is the effect of scientific advancements on our theological and legal.
No, actually, it's more practical. There are a number of practical questions that have come up because of technological advance. There is, I'm just giving you an example, organ transplant or organ donation.
So it's primarily a legal question. Can we eat laboratory-grown meat? Legal and ethical.
Ethical and also ethical, not just from the traditional view that science is ethical, but also.
So the questions of can we eat laboratory-grown meat? Can we do organ transplant? Yes. So good. All right, makes sense. So some of these are, and one overarching theme. Inshallah, we have been planning for the last few months to have a session on Islam and society and Islam and politics, and hopefully that will come within the near future. One of the overarching themes that all of us are responsible for, right? Remember, as a Muslim community, there is no responsibility that comes to an alim or somebody who is, say, Hawza trained, that does not also come in some measure to every other member of the ummah, because our responsibilities are collective responsibilities. Now, those with experience will have to carry out that responsibility in view of their greater experience. If I don't have experience, then I can't fulfill the same role that somebody with greater experience has. Those with knowledge will fulfill that role in a different way than somebody without knowledge, because their knowledge will allow them to play a role that somebody with less knowledge cannot play. But the responsibility is collective. The greatest responsibility that all of us have in society is to first affirm for ourselves and strengthen within ourselves, and then to convey to humanity that the origin of and the solution to all of the issues that we face is not political, it's not economic, but it is spiritual. Right? That is and that's why I wanted to start with the Quranic ayat that talk about purpose. Right? So, Marxism famously had a class and an economic analysis of society. You have many political thinkers that analyze society in terms of power dynamics. You have different ideas of what are the basic problems in society and solutions. As a Muslim community, our view is that all of those different expressions, they come from a question of meaning, from a spiritual source. And yes, politics is important, economics is important, all of those other domains are important, but the origin of our problems and our solutions is spiritual. And so that is what we need to focus our attention towards when it comes to say these types of questions of advancement of science. That can be a legal question. That can be illegal, and as you said, it ties into ethics. It can be a legal and an ethical question. But it's fully beneficial to us when it becomes a question of how does our practice, how does our consumption, how does our life in this world fulfill a spiritual purpose? Because that is how all of our actions should move forward. And so that's the framework that inshallah we'll try to use for all of these discussions. Whether they come to law, or whether they come to politics, or whether they come to something so simple as even how to do prayer properly, right? Or how to write a will. So thank you. So far we have two questions of gender interactions and roles in Islam, and a question of how the advancements in science and technology influence our practice and our ethics. Walaikum salam.
Actually, I'm not going to suggest from the topic that I also like to suggest, but I would like to really request our young, especially kids who are in high school and college, to recommend such suggestions. Because I think that's really more important. You guys really going through the tough times.
Yeah, what are the gaps that...
What's burning questions that you have? I think you should really make that.
Definitely, thank you. What are the gaps that you feel in terms of your understanding of Islam, or the gaps that you feel that if you had a resource, it would help you better connect with your religion and practice your religion? Where are those avenues that as a community we can come together to help fill?
How to explain Islam in a simple way if anybody ever asks you outside of the masjid or at school what the basic rules of Islam are, how do you follow the religion, just how to explain it in a way where it's not complicated.
Excellent question.
Okay. Inshallah, how to explain Islam to a non-Muslim. So, if I understood what you're saying correctly, the question is how can we convert religion from being a ritual to being something that motivates and animates our life, to give life or to revitalize our religious practice. And so we had some questions that were kind of intellectual. That is a good addition to it, which is, what can we do so that when we do a majlis, right, that's part of our religion and it can become a ritual, or it can become something very powerful. Right? Some of you may have been to the Arba'in walk, some of you may have heard about it and seen video clips of it. It's a very powerful thing. It is a ritual, but it's also potentially life-changing or inspiring for many people who have had that opportunity, and when they describe the experience. That's not limited to over there, right? It is on a much smaller scale. It is our collective challenge to practice our rituals, every majlis, every jum'ah, every salat or dua, in a way that not at the level of what you can get at Karbala in Arba'in, because that is a special time and a special place, but in that smaller capacity that revitalizes and inspires us to do better. And that comes when we are, on one level, redefining our community to represent relationships based on values. So in some cases, our programs, our rituals, they are based on convenience, or they're based on cultural affinity. They're not really based on values. That type of a practice can only inspire you so much. When we come together to pray, to worship, to conduct a ritual, tied not primarily by convenience or by family or by cultural similarity, but based on values, then the potential of even a very simple dua session to inspire becomes much greater. Because what brought us together is values, and not the fact that we all like the same kind of food, or we have a habitual connection to one another. So, thank you. Now remember, these are all things that now we need all of you who mentioned it to help bring to fruition. Because what we can offer is resources, we can offer a space, but for any of these seminars or for any of these activities to be successful, they need all of you to come and to volunteer your time and your sincerity and your participation, inshallah.
Thank you so much for organizing this venue and having us together. I just have two comments, one suggestion and one question. My first comment is for inshallah next time if we can hand out and give postcards and pencils, some of my sisters or even brothers may not be able to ask the question and maybe they be having a lot of questions in their mind. So I feel this is such an important place with all the questions which always come in our mind. I think it would be helpful for many of our sisters and brothers to write down their questions. Maybe if you don't have time to give the answer right away, you can send us an email with the answer. My second question is for all of us and our kids who are going through high school, colleges, who do not have as much time, how can we make our toolkit that we can strengthen our core values in the very little time that our kids have, or even we have? What can you help us, or what can we help ourselves with so we can keep those core values strengthening with time?
Very good. So your question is, what kinds of activities, what kinds of things can we do to strengthen our core values for all members of the family? And that's actually what we're trying to do, because the biggest part of what keeps our values alive is presence. When we look at ahadith, they tell us that even sometimes passive environment has a reward. So if you just carry a tasbih made from the dust of Karbala in your hand and you're not doing any dhikr, that has a reward. It's counted as ibadah because it reinforces a certain value system of identifying with Imam Hussein. You're not saying anything. To look at the Quran, even if you're not reading it, because it validates or it reinforces a certain value system. So presence, whether in a certain place or with certain people or within a certain environment, is the most important thing that reinforces our core identity. And the better we can ensure that presence meets emotional needs, social needs, intellectual needs, the more effective that presence will be. But it boils down to presence of mind and presence of heart. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
For next time, can you explain more about the justice and why some parents they got a child born with a disability? Thank you.
Sure. So there's a couple, so let me just acknowledge that we started off this discussion, but there's a number of very important questions of our belief in God that we still need to talk about. One of them, as you said, is the justice of God. Some parents, they don't have children at all, they want children. Some parents have children, they are born disabled. Some parents have children, they lose their children, God forbid. So we did not fully treat the question of God's justice. And we spoke about the idea that if you believe in values, you believe in God, even if you call yourself an atheist. But we didn't take that next step of what are the attributes of God. And, as people say in the West, why do you believe in an interventionist God in Islam? As opposed to, say, a God who just created and then sat back and science works on its own, right? Or a deist God, as many people did. So these are all important questions that, inshallah, in our coming sessions we will talk about. Thank you. So now we've heard a number of important topics. All of these are relevant topics, I think. They talk about issues that will affect how we live our lives. And even the ones that are a bit intellectual, they're not irrelevant to our practice. Because when you think about questions that are theological, you come out from that a different person. And when you come out a different person, then you are likely to live your life very differently than if you hadn't undergone that process of thinking and questioning and learning. But the next step, and we just have a few minutes before we're going to start getting ready for Maghrib, is can we put together a group of people who are willing to volunteer and whom we can call upon to say, we want to have the next session to talk about the justice of God, to talk about the attributes of God other than His justice, but all of the attributes of God. Why do we believe in an immanent God who actually cares about our prayer rather than just a God who has created the whole world? And all of these other important topics. And equally importantly, I think the question of rituals is very important. Our religion is a religion that emphasizes continuity of our practice from Adam alayhi salam until our time. A single religion. And that continuity comes from ritual. It comes from all of those practices. But we have to make sure that those practices are not empty ritual, because then they don't inspire you. They have a kind of superficial continuity. So, do we have people who will help us organize the next session? The next session can be the continuity of this very topic. Why do we believe in God? And what are the attributes that we believe in? But now, the effort and the initiative should be something that all of us together put into ensuring that these types of discussions, and then the output of these types of discussion, if we want to do charitable work, if we want to do outreach work, if we want to improve the way in which we conduct our rituals, that will be a collective initiative. So it's not an invitation from, a limited number of people to a broader audience, but all of you will be participating and will be hosts and will be responsible for the success of the initiative. So, final thoughts, and people who are going to stand up and volunteer, this is your chance, and in a few minutes we'll be ready for Salatul Maghrib, inshallah. Sure, please.
So, mashallah, it's a very good session, and I'm definitely willing to volunteer. I just wanted to clarify some logistical issues. That do you want to keep the venue? This is, and then just to facilitate bringing people in and so forth, or what is the?
So, as we start, we have this venue, and we will continue to do events at this venue, but we're not limited to one location. So our primary goal is to be present in order to gain a greater insight about our religion, and then to live that insight in our life. And that means that we need to breathe life into our existing institutions. But it's not limited to one building or one location. It requires all of the institutions that we have of our community to be revived, to be strengthened. But it's not limited to that. So as we organize, we may have, for example, an initiative before, say, the 15th of Sha'ban, and we want to bring together the broader community, and it might be hosted, say, if the weather is good, at a park. We may have discussion sessions that are hosted here for convenience of prayer and other things. So as we plan a multitude of events, the type of event and the intended audience of that event will determine how and where those events will be hosted. Of course, one big part of that is the very rituals that we have. We have Jum'ah prayer here, we have a weekly Dua Kumail, we have Majalis and Milad celebrations. All of those need to be strengthened so that they can better meet their purpose.
Can I suggest something?
Please.
It's okay, you can keep the mic. My suggestion would be that, mashallah, this event has gone very well here. So why don't we agree to at least hold the next 3 to 4 sessions here in Shah Najaf on Sunday at 4 p.m. It could be a weekly or a fortnightly thing. The advantage of this is logistics are very straightforward and it's easy. So we could just do it that way, and then once it's sort of nicely established, then we can think about broadening it out in other formats. I don't know if you're okay with that, but maybe for the audience also it might be just more predictable and easy to know that there will be a session, say, every fortnight or every week, whatever you can.
I think that given that we have, a limited time until the month of Ramadan, and it would be good for us to follow up on this initial discussion and have a little bit of a complete picture of our understanding of Tawheed that animates all of our other discussions. So this time was chosen so that if people have Sunday school commitments and other things, they can still make it afterwards and participate. So Sunday at 4 p.m., let's say in 2 weeks at this location. I know everybody is not always going to be able to be available, and inshallah we will try to have a recording available and accommodate as many people as we can. But does that by and large work for the majority of you? So what time is... So for those coming from different Sunday schools, because we don't want to make people leave early. So for those of you who attend Shah Najaf Sunday School like we did this week, we'll start Sunday school later, so it'll be easier. So whenever we have a program, and next time we'll do a better job of announcing it ahead of time. But should we start with a fortnight?
Every other Sunday, and I'll announce all the dates and the times for until Ramadan, until April, second week in April. I'll publish that, inshallah, on the WhatsApp group and the email, the dates and the times, inshallah, so everybody knows and can plan right now.
So also, if any of you is not on the Shah Najaf mailing list, then one way, if you heard about it through friends or if you heard about it through the WhatsApp announcement, then that's great. We will continue to announce it by those means. But if you're not part of the mailing list, then sign up to the mailing list. You can go to shahnajafdc.org and sign up to receive the emails, and so you will get the announcement ahead of time for each event. But inshallah, we can send a schedule for all of them before the next event. For now, we will continue with this discussion of what does it mean to believe in God, and then inshallah we will be able to expand into the other questions and discussions that you raised. And please do continue to share your questions and other topics that are important to you so we can continue to build and it doesn't become a one-time event, inshallah. So it is time for Maghrib. Let us get ready for Salatul Maghrib by reciting Salawat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. I think we can go in the other hall. Let me announce.
उधर हॉल में कर लें. Inshallah, we will be doing the salat in the other hall. So we will not be able to clean up this hall to prepare. So you can stack up the chairs, but if you, let's do it there. Okay. Okay, let's try to clean up the hall and do the salat over here.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم أشهد أن عليا ولي الله صلوات الله وسلامه أشهد أن عليا حجة الله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله
So, men, if we can have you move forward, we can fill in the first rows so that there is room for those who are going to be joining.
Everybody in the second and third row, move to your left so that others who come in can.
I think we should have enough room.
Are there more people outside? Are there more people outside? Couple of people? Then we'll print. Just move as much as possible to your left and no gaps.
If you see any gaps in the prayer rows, then please fill in those gaps. Come closer together. We have room for one person to come in the front. Should we?
I think when we stand up, everybody, when you stand up, just move to your left.
I think we're okay. Yeah. صلاة المغرب. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. كذلك الله ربنا. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إنا نرغب إليك في دولة كريمة تعز بها الإسلام وأهله وتذل بها النفاق وأهله وتجعلنا فيها من الدعاة إلى طاعتك والقادة إلى سبيلك وترزقنا بها كرامة الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد أركع وأسجد. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر.
تسبيح فاطمة الزهراء سلام الله عليها.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك موجبات رحمتك وعزائم مغفرتك والنجاة من النار ومن كل بلية والفوز بالجنة ورضوان في دار السلام وجوار نبيك محمد عليه وعليه السلام. اللهم ما بنا من نعمة فمنك لا إله إلا أنت. أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.
صلاة العشاء. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليًا ولي الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة. قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل يا أيها الكافرون لا أعبد ما تعبدون ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد ولا أنا عابد ما عبدتم ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد لكم دينكم ولي دين. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد كذلك الله ربنا. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم أحينا حياة محمد وذريته وأمتنا مماتهم وتوفنا على ملتهم واحشرنا في زمرتهم ولا تفرق بيننا وبينهم طرفة عين أبدا في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأركع وأسجد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. Allahu Akbar.
Tasbih Fatimatu Zahra, Salamullah alayha.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم إن مغفرتك أرجى من عملي وإن رحمتك أوسع من ذنبي اللهم إن كان ذنبي عندك عظيما فعفوك أعظم من ذنبي اللهم إن لم أكن أهلا نبلغ رحمتك فرحمتك أهل أن تبلغني وتسعني لأنها وسعت كل شيء برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. صل على محمد. Before we conclude the program with ziyarah, I want to thank all of you who attended. Jazakumullah, inshallah. Give us your thoughts, your feedback, additional questions that you have. This was the introductory session because the question of why we believe in God is the foundational question that defines our life. But we will explore all of the additional questions and implications of that topic in our coming sessions, and we hope that we will have as many enthusiastic participants as we did today, because until we come to the destination, then we have to stick together and stay on that journey. And if you have any criticisms or any suggestions to improve the program, then please do share that, because this is to be for you. So give yourself a voice and please do share your thoughts. I want to thank our moderators, our reciters, those who also shared in preparations and bringing the refreshments. So for all of our volunteers, for our community, for the marhumeen of our community, and for all of the shuhada and the ulama of Islam and all of those who devoted their life to the propagation of our faith, let us remember them in our du'as and in our prayers by reciting salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And for those who are deceased, let us recite a Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. Sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim. غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. After Salat, the program will come to a conclusion with ziyarat now. But I will be here for a few more minutes. If any of you would like to stay for a few minutes and share some of your thoughts or ideas, then I will still be here for some time. So please do stay and share any thoughts that you may have before you leave. You can stand for ziyarat, inshallah. السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام على علي أمير المؤمنين السلام على فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين السلام على الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة السلام على علي بن الحسين زين العابدين السلام على محمد بن علي الباقر السلام على جعفر بن محمد الصادق. السلام على موسى بن جعفر الكاظم. السلام على علي بن موسى الرضا. السلام على محمد بن علي الجواد. السلام على علي بن محمد الهادي. السلام على الحسن بن علي الزكي العسكري. السلام على الحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي، صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين. صلوات.